Hey guys, wanted to do another update for you on the 3.5 gallon Nano bowls, tanks, whatever you want to call them, and show you something. I kind of wish I would have done this yesterday because it was more evident yesterday. But if you ever try one of these, and again, I don't recommend a no-filtered, completely natural system for your first system. It takes a little bit more fiddling with at times, and it takes a lot. The big thing it takes is more patience. There won't be a fish in either of these until probably late March. And usually when somebody's doing their first tank, they want to get up and running a little bit quicker. But I wanted a couple things I want to talk about. One, I want to talk to you about a plant, this little guy right here called Ambulia today, which I think is a great plant no matter what you're doing, as long as you understand what you're playing with. Because this has only been in here a week, and it was a little sprig about that big laying horizontal when I put it in, and it's done that in a week. Now, remember, these bowls magnify stuff, so we'll get to that in a second. I'll show you the actual size of this leaf in a different tank where it's not being magnified like that with the bowl. But the growth is, that's totally valid. That thing grew, 5 inches in a week. And it will start sending up other little plants, so we'll have to control that. There'll be a lot of, it's not a big deal, but it does mean that it's going to be probably once a week, once every other week, you're going to be having to cut and take plant material out of the tank. And that, when you make a decision with something like Ambulia, you want to think about that. Do I want to do that much? That's where something, like Anubias is a very slow-growing plant, but that means there's a lot less work for you to do. So, what I wanted to actually talk to you about today is if you look at this bowl, and if you look right down there, you'll see like this hazy, like smoky, floating fog. And if you were setting one of these up, you might think, oh, God, something's wrong. And you look over at this one, and this is just absolutely beautiful. It's crystal clear. I know it maybe doesn't look it all the time because the light is kind of harsh up there. I still haven't built my little block out up there, but I'll get to it. But it's very, very clear. It's got none of that going on. So what is this? I don't know exactly what causes this, but this is common with new setups, especially ones with no moving water, and they'll go through this cycle. Yesterday, I wish it almost looked like there were cobwebs hanging, this white, stringy stuff like this all over the tank. And then back there on that Java moss, you can see a little bit of it. It was all over. Now it's gone. Now, part of it, I'm sure, is the shrimp probably ate on whatever was good in it for them. But you can see kind of cloudy right there as well. This happens. And if you just let it go, don't worry about it. It'll pass through it. Now, again, there's no fish in here. There's lots of plants in here, and there's a bioactive substrate in here. So we've got nature doing nature's things. Now, one thing that might have made it a little bit worse is I had to do something I didn't want to do. When I set one of these up for at least a couple weeks, I almost don't want to touch it. In the back there, you see that piece of Valsnaria. All of a sudden, it looked like it grew like a lot. Like it was like how did Valsnaria grow that fast? What had happened, it came up rooted, and I needed to replant it. And one of the weaknesses of these bowls is, even though you can see I got quite a bit of substrate in there, when you're planting stuff out here on the edge, you don't have much to hold it with. So I got my tongs, and I got it in there as best I could, and I took a couple small pinches of the Carib Sea Eco Complete and kind of just dropped it around there. And that stuff does cloud up a little, so it may have made it worse, but it's really following the same path. So just wanted to kind of show you that, that's the kind of thing you can expect as you start to do tanks like this, and you got to wait and let it get through it. Now, I have been asked, well, why are shrimp already in there? Why are snails already in there if it hasn't cycled yet? Because they can handle it. Because they can handle it and they get the cycle going. And, the truth is I have about a bazillion little shrimps over there in my other tanks. And so if they die, well, okay, I lost a shrimp or two. It's just not a big deal. I might feel differently had I been putting very expensive shrimp that I had to purchase into the tanks. Let's go back on this Ambulia thing, because I had quite a few questions when I posted the last couple pictures of this tank on Facebook and what this plant is really all about. This is a very fast-growing stem plant, and that means that if you just cut a piece of it and stick it in the substrate, it'll just start growing. It doesn't really grow a lot floating, but if you need to float it for a while because you don't know where you want to put it, it will grow as a floating plant. It will certainly stay alive as a floating plant. It'll be very happy because it's much closer to your lighting as a floating plant. I want to show you, though, that this plant is very different depending on what conditions it's grown under. If you look, this right here, and you see it's not as green when it's this big in my tank. This was given to me by my friend Nick. This was grown with CO2 injected into the tank. The leaf form is very similar, but it's a much bigger in diameter plant. And Nick said he actually pulled it out of his tank because it was taking over his entire aquascape. Now, he's traveling a lot right now, so he's not doing a lot of maintenance. But I can see if you have a tank that's set on automation and you leave for a month and you come back, that this stuff, especially with CO2 injected, can really take off. The stuff that's in the little nano tank, though, is a lot more like that. And those pieces there. These are side shoots that have come up off of this mother plant here. And as you can see, it's a lot more compact. And this plant's doing okay in this tank. I'm not really in love with it. If you look at down here, you can see that the stuff growing down here, which is in the Eco Complete substrate, if you have a good substrate, and again, I set this tank up as plain gravel. It's a couple-year-old tank. And I really want to re-aquascape it because it's just plain gravel. I'd like to get a much more valuable substrate in there. But if you look down here where it's got a good substrate, it is really nice and green. It looks a lot like what's over there in the tank. And it's more about that size in the tank than the size that it looks. Let's go back over there and let me talk to you about what I love about this plant. Number one, it grows really fast. I love that it grows really fast. Number two, I think if you have decent substrate and anything approaching a decent light, again, that's an inexpensive NiCrew premium. That's a $25 light up there. It's going to grow for you. I think it's really hard for it not to grow for you. Next, shrimp, love it. You can see we got one little cherry hanging out there in the plant, but they're in there all the time. Number three, I think for any kind of, if you're going to be doing any kind of breeding, fry, love it. Small fish, love it. In that other tank, the Celestial Pearl Danus and the Mosquito Rasboras are in it all the time. And if you think about it, you know, if you're a Mosquito Rasbora and you're about a half an inch long, that's a jungle. That one little sprig is a jungle for you to explore and feel safe in. It is easy to propagate. Cut, stick, grow. It's that simple. The bad, it is incredibly fragile when you're trying to plant it and propagate it. Right there, it's not. Like, you reach in there and pull on it, it's not going to pull apart on you. Your fish ain't going to tear it up. Like, if you put it with cichlids, they're going to demolish it or something. But in general, fish that leave plants alone, it's not. That's not how I mean it's fragile. Number two, I don't mean it's fragile and it'll die on you really easily. What I mean is the stem is fragile, and when you try to stick it into the substrate, it breaks. And what ends up happening, you end up with a piece of it's like 8 inches long, and by the time you get it in the substrate without breaking it off, it's like 4. It's okay. It comes back. And usually your first one will grow really, really tall, and maybe it'll send out another tip off of it, and then it'll start to send up another one, and another, and then it starts to send little ones everywhere. And that's when it really kind of takes on a life of its own. And what I found is when you cut off those pieces from those additional shoots that come out of the bottom, they break less, but they still break. And if you get this plant shipped to you, or even if a friend brings it to you, if it's out of an aquarium in a bag or something like that, or a bucket for a couple days, that stem gets really, really tender. So if you find this plant from a supplier and you buy it online, and you get it, and you have that experience with it, understand the supplier didn't do anything wrong. The other thing I like about it is while it does take a while to adjust when you pull it out of a CO2 injected tank into a low-tech tank like this, it never melts. It doesn't melt. It'll get darker in color, but it'll start growing pretty quick. And since it sends up little happy shoots, once those roots get established down there, really quick, you're to a plant with a leaf form that grew in your tank. So I love it, but I'm going to go back to, I also like to fiddle with my aquariums. I like to once a week come in here, pull off the top growth. If something's too big, I don't mind taking a couple seconds and trimming it off. If I have another place for it to go, I'll put it there. If I don't, I'll compost it. Or, I might get to a point where I have so much surplus at some point, I do a little bit of private one-on-one selling of it. I'll certainly share it with anybody that's local, that's around. So I like to do that. Again, I feel like the maintenance I do on my tanks, unless something goes wrong and I'm doing it when I don't plan on doing it, I feel like it's things I get to do versus things I have to do, and that's why I love this as a hobby. And then, again, I think I said this today, but I want to make sure I'm clear on this. I am not feeding these animals at all. There is no food being added to these tanks at this time. It is basically a natural ecosystem. The only exception is, you see this water lettuce was put in here yesterday. It's still kind of like dirty looking. And if you look at like the water lettuce roots hanging right there, and if you haven't ever seen water lettuce, it's the bigger plant right there. What I am doing to make, because there's quite a few shrimp in here, to make sure that there's enough for them to eat, is I am taking occasionally some water lettuce out of one of my other tanks and pulling this water lettuce out and throwing it away and putting in the water lettuce that has more of the fish poo and detritus on it. So that's, if anything, what they're getting fed. And that's happening maybe once to twice a week, depending on how hungry they look. I want them hungry right now. I don't want them heavily fed. You never want to heavily feed a small tank anyway, but I don't want to heavily feed them now, because this point, as we're going through this cycle, is where we have the most potential to have algae problems. And the more they are willing to eat the algae, the more they are willing to consume the biofilm, and the less overall waste being produced, the less potential we have for algae to get out of hand. There will be algae. Again, I've said that before. Anybody that tells you that there's no algae in a well-balanced tank, they're just flat out wrong and probably insane. Algae ends up in all of our tanks that are later. The key is control and not letting it get out of hand. So I want these guys munching down as much as possible. There's a little Mississippi grass shrimp hanging out there on the Java moss. Anyway, one more thing, guys. If you're going to use plants like this water lettuce, anything that has a dangling root and top growth, and you're going to grow these little neocardinia shrimps and probably any other shrimp, when they start breeding for you, and you go to take this top growth out to do your weekly maintenance, if you care about your population, you got to be like the evil giant at first and kind of shake that and make them all bail ass down so that they're afraid and they retreat. Otherwise, when you pull that out, there's going to be little shrimps in there that you're discarding. Or maybe they're getting into places you don't want them. And maybe there's some of your best quality you won't know. I don't expect to see a ton of breeding in these tanks because I'm going to really suppress the feeding. But if even one or two females have one group, you're talking about 60 shrimp, 30 to 60 shrimp showing up. And like I said, we'll be putting them outside. Anyway, biggest focus today is the Ambulia. It's a plant that I really love, really easy to grow. It's a little bit tender when you first put it in. It's going to require your attention to keep it from taking over your tank. But I just think it's beautiful. And the shrimps like it. Anyway, we'll catch up with you later. Remember, if you like this sort of thing, you might like all the other cool stuff I do. I do have a podcast, 5 days a week, Monday through Friday, called the Survival Podcast. You can find it at tspc.co. If you have any questions, please post them in the comments below, and I'll try to get them answered for you.